Hi everyone and welcome to Writes for Women. I'm Rachael Johns. I should say that firstly. I'm an author of rural romance and women's fiction, and I'm a guest host now on Writes for Women, which is super exciting. And I'm here today with one of my most famous friends, the incomparable Sally Hepworth. Thank you for joining us, Sally.
Oh, it's so good to be here. Less of the famous stuff.
Come on, you are super famous. But not only that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about your amazing books, which is why you're famous. But your New York Times,
Also for the wigs.
Because of the wigs and your toast. Okay, anyone who isn't following Sally on Instagram, where have you been? Like, you mustn't be on Instagram, I think. What have you had? You've had Kettlegate, Towelgate, and then do we call it Wiggate, or is that just okay, Wiggate? But basically, Sally is the best entertainment on Instagram. So yeah, go and check out her Instagram. If you're not, you mustn't be on Instagram or if you're not following. But yeah, Sally is the New York Times bestselling author of 8 books. Am I right?
Yeah. Yep.
Cool. That's right. And the next one comes out. I actually don't know when this will be uploaded, but I'm guessing it's probably going to be uploaded or whatever in the next couple of weeks. So I'm thinking by the time you hear this, Sally's new book, The Soulmate, will be out in Australia and New Zealand, but it's not out for the rest of the world till next year. Is that right?
Till April. Yeah.
April. So you have this really quite long promotion period.
I know, but it doesn't go for the whole time. Like it goes for 2 weeks now, and then it stops, and then it starts again. I just was sent a message from someone on Instagram telling me they were coming to my event in Cleveland in April. And I thought, oh, gee, I didn't know.
Wow.
No one's told me that I'm going to be in Cleveland.
Was that the first time you knew you were going to be in Cleveland?
Yeah. I haven't even spoken about next year's tour yet. But
isn't that the way we find out about everything these days? Social media?
In general, it is. Yeah.
Like it used to be in small towns that everyone else knew everything about you before you did. And now it's that the internet knows what's going on in your life before you do.
It's a convenient way to find out. And it might be weeks before my publisher tells me.
Yes, exciting. I wish I was going to Cleveland, and I'm sure you're going to some other exciting places as well. So today I should also say, before I got myself off track, I was going to say, as well as being the author of the New York Times bestselling author of 8 wonderful novels, these are some other people you may have heard of, some things they've said about Sally. Jane Harper, she calls Sally's books compulsive. Leanne Moriarty, I'm very jealous of this quote, says Sally is one of her favourite Australian writers. Wow. And if that's not enough, Kate Morton called her book unputdownable. So Sally lives in Melbourne with her husband and 3 gorgeous children who are also all equally entertaining on Instagram. You get the whole package with Sally.
They get it from me. We're very good at doing everything we're not supposed to be.
Oh, I think, why stop? You're doing great. And who says you're not supposed to be? Like, seriously, who says what we should be doing and what we shouldn't be doing? So today, because Sally has a book out called The Soulmate in the next week, and I have a new book out called The Workwives in the week after, we thought today this is a craft of writing episode. And so Sally and I have known each other for a few years now, and we are quite different writers, not just in what we write. I write, I guess, mine has more romantic elements and not as many thrillerish elements as Sally. Would you say that's an apt description, Sally, or how would we?
Yeah, there's a lot of crossover, I would say.
Yeah,
they both focus on women and relationships.
Yeah.
But I think probably a little bit more death in my books.
Yes, if your deaths are more sinister deaths, maybe if there's any deaths in my book, they're not quite so sinister.
Natural causes. Yeah.
Yes, that's a good difference. I love it. But aside from like the genre, as writers, we always hear plotting versus pantsing, and I'm sure you agree with me, Sally. If you don't, I'm just saying you do. That we're all on the spectrum somewhere. No one is completely a plotter and complete outliner, and no one I don't think anyone who does this professionally as for a job can just sit down and completely start something one day and have no idea what they're doing. Would you agree?
I hope so. Imagine that. I've never heard anyone say that, and if they did, I don't think I'd believe them.
Or we wouldn't like them if they meant it. Yeah. But so I would say I probably identify more on the pantsing end of the spectrum. And Sally, where do you think you would fit?
It's been such an evolution.
That's
Certainly,
true.
historically, I'm a plotter.
Mm.
And that was how I taught myself to write. And that's how, in fact, a few years ago when you and I went on tour together doing some events in WA, and I think we did some in Melbourne, it was almost a comedy act because you would talk about how you just went with a wing and a prayer, and I was over here plotting out every scene, and it was
one draft and you had multiple.
draft. I've never been able to figure out how you do that, but I still, while I do plot, it hasn't helped me very much because I still end up writing so many drafts.
That it's easier. Like I think, or maybe where it's always like a grass is greener thing, because I think, oh, I wish I could plot my books and outline a little bit more, because surely then it would be not so scary and I'd know where I'm going. But nothing's easy, is it? That's the...
You don't plot and you write one draft, and I plot and I write 100. So who's working smarter? You tell me.
I don't know. I think it's just the thing is, no, everyone's different, aren't we? And when I say, I think I'm like you, it's interesting. I think I've learned more about my process in the last few years, and I've started to think about it more. And although I would identify more towards a pantser, I microplot as I go. And I do something which I learned about in a book. I think it was, oh my gosh, I can't remember. My mind is gone. I'll try and remember so that Pam can put it in the show notes. But a book, I think it's James Scott Bell, actually. He talks about looping, and that you write 500 words and then edit them. And while I don't do that, and we're jumping ahead, but so we'll get to process and pantsing.
Sorry.
No, that's my fault, because it's just so interesting. I love talking about different ways people write and stuff. And I feel like I have learned more myself in the last few years about what I do. So yeah, we'll get to that. But let's start with the seed of inspiration for your latest book. I've jumped ahead. Tell us about the Soulmate. Pitch us the book. Why should we read it? I've already read it, so I know why I should read it. But
so the Soulmate, as I guess anyone who's read any of my books know, I write about family dysfunctionality. It's my favorite thing to write about, and I've written about mothers-in-law and sisters and neighbors and younger wives. And this time I decided to write about the most dysfunctional relationship of all, which is marriage.
Very true.
And this book takes place in a cottage on a cliff, and the couple that live there moved before they realized that the cliff that their house is perched on is a place that's very popular with people who want to go and end their lives. And when they discover this, they also discover that Gabe, who is the husband, has got a bit of a gift for talking people down from the ledge, as it were.
Yeah, fascinating.
In the year that they have been there, 7 people have come to the ledge, and all 7 have been talked down by Gabe. And at the very beginning of the book, a woman comes to the cliff, and she's the number 8, the 8th one to come. And it starts out as normal, and they see her out the window. Gabe goes out, he starts talking to her. But as his wife, Pip, watches them, she starts to notice that he's behaving a little differently, and he's a lot more animated than usual, and he's going a little bit closer to her than he usually does. And it almost looks like they're having an argument. And Pip is forced to look away for a moment. And when she looks back, she notices that Gabe's hands are outstretched with palms are facing up, and it looks almost like he might have pushed her. And from there, we go forward. He says that it was an accident and that she jumped. She's not sure about what she saw. And we move forward and we start to discover what actually happened that night on the cliff.
It's a killer first chapter. Like, I just think it's one of the best first chapters I've ever read. It gripped you in immediately. And such that moral dilemma as to, do you believe your husband who you love, or do you believe yourself and what your gut is telling you about what you maybe saw? I think it's really fascinating, and it's such a great opening. So we'll get to how I've got so many more questions for you. We should just be talking about your book, really, because I want to know everything. But I'll just quickly give a spiel.
There's room for both.
Which is out just the week after Sally's. And The Workwives is about 2 women who are as different as Schitt's Creek and Downton Abbey. And they both work at an energy drink company in Sydney. Quinn is young, and she's in her 20s, and she's addicted to dating app. And She is in digital media. She loves dressing bright colors and fun things. And then we've got Deb. Oh, she's desperate to find the one. And then we've got Deb, who is in her early 40s, and she has sworn off men when she had her daughter 15 years ago. So she's a single mum. She wears black all the time. She would rather fly under the radar and not be seen. And she works in accounting. Quite different sort of roles, but they have become best friends through work. And then a new guy arrives at the office who they both have a history with, and that kind of throws a bit of a spanner in the works of their friendship. As with your book, it's kind of hard to talk about. Hopefully that's book deliveries. Yeah, clothes or earrings, hey? Although I've been trying to restrain
not bills.
Yeah, what's that? Yeah, not bills. Hopefully the postman doesn't ring the bell when the bills come. Yeah, so it's hard to talk about both books without spoilers, I think. But we're gonna do our best to get into the nitty-gritty of the inspiration and how we wrote the book. Sally, do you want to tell us, that is such a, when I read your blurb first, before I'd read the book, I just thought, how come I can never think of such a cool idea like that? Like, it's just, I don't know if you find, like, when Leanne Moriarty, I read The Husband's Secret, I'm thinking, such a clever idea about you finding a letter from a loved one and then being told not to open it. But I never thought of that. Why did I think of that? And it's the same in some ways with your book. I think as soon as you hear I guess that's high concept. When you hear an idea and you think, wow, that's so great. Why didn't I think of it? Because it's actually kind of not obvious. But, wow, that's a really good story, surely. Yeah, where did the inspiration for this come from? Or the first seed of the
Well, before I say that, I was going to say the same with the work wives. In fact, I remember it may or may not have been the first time I heard that you might have even put the title up on social media to say, hey, what does everyone think about this title? And I know you often start with titles, don't you? I think
I did with this one.
Title, and that almost feeds the book in a way. I think it's
I think if you've got a good title, like, it can help you write the book kind of thing. Yeah.
And I haven't read, because a work wife is such a concept that people are familiar with, and I haven't read anything. I know.
Finally, I was like, yes, finally I've done something that maybe someone hasn't done. And then in July this year, a book came out called The Work Wife. But hey, it's totally different, and that's the thing, isn't it? We can write something that sounds similar, but there's no idea that's the same, and there's no idea that's original in some ways.
100%. It is. And yeah. Okay. Well, let me tell you. So the inspiration for the Soulmate came from two places. The first one was in large part inspired by the lockdown, and actually probably, if I could pinpoint the moment, and for people listening, I am from Melbourne, which I think was probably the longest lockdown in the world, or there was some sort of stats like that.
Yeah.
And it was about, I don't know, 60 days into the lockdown in Melbourne. It was winter. I had two children being homeschooled. I had a preschool age child who had taken to running around the house in the nude with permanent markers and finding new places. And lipstick, finding new places to draw on the walls. And it was about 10 to 9, that glorious time when all of the kids realize they need their logins to get into their homeschool kind of thing, and some project that they haven't done becomes immediately urgent. And Clementine, I noticed that my Sharpies are missing, and I look out the window and I see Christian walk past with the lawnmower, and he's mowing the lawn. And I thought to myself, I am going to write a book about marriage and murder. And
did you want to kill him when he was mowing the lawn, not inside?
Indeed I did. Yeah. And I wanted to find a very imaginative way to murder him. So I remember taking my phone and going into the pantry so I could hide. And I opened up a WhatsApp group with all my oldest girlfriends, and I wrote, is anyone else fantasizing about killing their husbands? And you know what those WhatsApp groups are like, they're patchy, and it was 10 to 9, like everyone would have been scrambling to get everything done. And it was full attendance within seconds. People were writing their stories about the different ways in which they wanted to kill their husbands. And I said, I'm thinking about writing a book about it. And it was full marks. So everyone wanted the book, and I thought, good, this is what I'm going to write. And so at the same time, because obviously an idea or a moment like that does not a book make, but my antennae went up for something.
Yeah.
And it was around then that I read a news article, which it was about a man in Sydney, but it made it all the way around the world, this story. And the man lived in a place in Sydney opposite a place called The Gap, which is a place where people in real life go to take their own lives. And this man had made his name, amongst other things, but a name for being cliff whisperer, and they called him the Angel of the Gap for all of the ways that the lives that he'd saved. And I read that article, and obviously you can see, because I told you about the plot, how that meshed together with the story about marriage.
And having read it, I think it's very clever the way you put it together. But and
all the possibilities that it leaves you for who could be lying, and what could you get away with in that scenario if you had a grudge, and then certainly back to that in marriage, how do we lie to ourselves about what we think and feel? And sometimes we lie to ourselves for survival. So they were the two kind of elements that came together.
I just want to ask you a quick question first, because there's a lot of issues in this book in terms of, you've got obviously the suicide issue, you've got marriage is an issue in itself. There's other issues such as mental health. It was now a month or so ago since I read the book, but I'm sure I'm missing some other things. Anyway, what I was going to say is, I ask this question a lot, so I'm always curious, and I think it changes for me from book to book. Do you, obviously then you read that story, you have to have an issue. Suicide has to be an issue if you're going to deal with that. But what about like the other issues, not just the marriage and the suicide, but the other sort of issues that came? Did you know all about that before you started writing? And how did you decide what other issues?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, as you say, it started with those two things. So I knew marriage and I knew suicide, because it really was inspired by that article. And then it really became a question of what's going to happen. What's going to be the mystery to solve, essentially. And then when I came up with that, you start asking the why. If this is what the suspense part is, why would someone do that? And I start to, this comes back to the plotting and pantsing, I start working it out in my head. So even if I wasn't the type to plot it and write it all down, you need to figure out if what your idea is plausible. Is there a reason?
You've said it better than me, but we all have to pants at a certain stage, because that initial sort of thinking is pantsing, really, and just working out, well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. No. And then we all have to plot at some stage, because we all have to put it in an order, whether you do that on the page or in our head. Yeah, it's interesting.
Exactly. Yeah. And the different areas and different things that came up, there was ADHD and bipolar. I touched on.
Right. I knew that. I was trying to remember what the other things were. Yeah.
And I tend to try and focus on things that have touched my life, either personally or through perhaps a close friend, or maybe a close friend of mine has a family member. Because of course,
aside from the murder.
Yeah, I've got a few friends that have murdered their husbands, so I was able to get a real touch and go. Luckily, all of the husbands survived the lockdown. I had to write in my acknowledgements that no husbands were harmed. The writing of this book. That's but so and all my friends are still married, but that may have been because of the WhatsApp group. But I do try to, if I can, address topics that I have got some sort of real experience with. It's not always the case. As you know, this is my 8th book, 9th if we include the one that I'm writing now. I haven't had that much experience with that many things, so sometimes you
need a lot of therapy if you'd experienced all of the issues in your book.
Oh my God. And I do have therapy probably because of that. And I have ADHD myself. Bipolar is something that has affected one of my very best friend's brother. And on top of that, I read a lot of books and spoke to a lot of people. But
I think that's what makes these books so gripping. It's not just the plot, which is twisty, and it's that you can relate, and they are important issues as well. And I think I know, coming from a romance writing background, people often are quick to write off that there's no depth in romance. It's all just light and fluffy. And I think people maybe sometimes think that about crimes or thrillers or domestic as well, because the crime is what people like you first hear about. But I think the best books and most books, whatever the genre, they do explore, and that's what you relate to in them. It's the people and it's the issues that they've gone through, because not necessarily the sort of the romance or the crime part.
And I would argue that romance and crime as a genre, if they don't go into dynamic relationships with really important subject matters as motivation, then they don't work, and then
what's the point in reading them? I know, and that's, I think that it's a misconception that certain books don't actually go into depth about other things, because that's what, you know. Anyway, we won't get into that discussion too much. So the Work Wives, as you mentioned, the title was actually the first thing that came to me, because I was doing a podcast with I think Brand New magazine, and the interviewer just happened to say, it was a Friday afternoon, and she just happened to say, I'm really looking forward to drinks with my work wives tonight, because, you know, the podcast was something else she did as well. And I just suddenly thought, I mean, I'd heard, like you, the concept work wives, I've heard it lots before, but other conversations I'd been having at the time about titles with a couple of author friends, and ones that kind of worked. I'd also recently read a book, bits of it, because I never read fully these craft books, but it wasn't a writing craft exactly, but the bestseller code. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's these people. It's interesting in terms of, it's a group, it's some scientists who have somehow worked out that all best-selling books have certain, it's an algorithm type thing. They've put J.K. Rowling and Stephen King and Danielle Steele and Nicholas Sparks and one of the sections is about titles. And so your titles say tick their boxes amazingly, like the mother-in-law, the younger wife, the good sister, and it's 3 words often is one of the best things, and then certain buzzwords obviously, and in the beginning, actually. Go figure. Jeez. So you've done it, you know, whether your publisher helped you with this but it's fascinating.
So I don't need to read it then?
But probably not. You don't need to. That's the most important part, and you're already doing it. And so I just remember thinking, the Work Wives would be a great title, and I just said it as a flyaway thing. And then I thought about it more, and like I'd been thinking about another idea for a while. I don't know if you've got any of these, like ideas that I would like to write, or they're not quite there, and I don't know if I ever will, but I was thinking, what am I going to do? Nothing. Then this idea just was like literally that words, and I thought, well, I need people who work together, and what's the thing? And it just all came from there. But there's other things that I was interested in. I'd seen an article about addiction to dating apps, and how the swiping left or right was actually similar to pokey machines, in that you just one more to see if I might actually meet the love of my life on the next one. Or that whole thing about, I'll go out with this guy, but what if the next guy was even better? So it's like they couldn't actually commit.
I'm so glad they didn't have dating apps.
I know. Do you reckon you would have been like that? No. What if the next guy's better?
Keep on swiping.
Yeah, exactly. And so I thought that was really fascinating. And I'd also read an article about a 1950s article about how to find a husband, and the total differences in that, which was like things like set up a painting easel outside an engineering school, or cry in the corner of someone. Was so funny. So yeah, like you, then they started piecing together the different things, and the characters came from there. Let's talk a little bit about how you write a book. Once you've got those initial seeds and ideas, how do you actually do it? I know that's a weird question to ask, but yeah, what's your process?
No, it's a great question to ask. And I was just talking recently about the fact someone was running a writer's retreat or a writing course, and she was talking about it as if it's obviously quite easy to say how to write a book because she'd done it so many times. And I thought, no, it's one of those things. And I often feel like people expect us to be able to explain it. But if you said to an accountant, how do you be an accountant? You just kind of do the next thing. And I always think, if you want to know how to write a book, ask a debut author, because when I'd written one book, I had rules. I could tell you how to do it.
So true.
The more books I write, the more I think, yeah, you could do it that way or that way. Or
that is so true. And everyone is so different. It changes from each time. That's why I always panic, and I think you do too, if someone asks me to do a writing workshop. And I'm like, I don't know how to tell you how to write a book.
I've never done it because, and I will never do it now. No one ever has asked me, I don't think.
I'm sure they would love you to.
Thankfully, because I wouldn't know what to say, because I can tell you now that I use Scrivener. That's one solid thing that I can say, which for those listening is a writing program, which is there's nothing wrong with Word. I need to say that first.
So you haven't used Scrivener like for all your books, have you?
I have not. And I've even used it for a book, say I used it for book 4, and then I didn't use it for book 5 and 6, and then I found it again. I caution people to think that they have to have all of it's inexpensive, but you don't necessarily need to have all of the things, but I find Scrivener to be a useful tool. And I guess the things that haven't changed back from the times when I was a plot out every scene, to the times that I have been more of a high level plotter, because I've never been a complete pantser.
Yeah.
I start with a plan. that gives me the confidence to dive in, because I think I know where this is going. I've got a direction to write towards.
That's the confidence I want.
Yeah, but I think perhaps that is all it is, just confidence, because it very rarely, if ever, has stuck with the plan that I have had planned, whether it's because it bores me or because it just gets me far enough into to get to the next bit. But I always start writing in that direction. I always get about 25,000 words in and think, nah, what I planned doesn't work anymore. I'm going to try something else. I do that consistently throughout the book as I write it to the end. And when I get to the end, I already know that I have to go straight back to the beginning, pull it apart, and then go in.
So you always write straight ahead. You never go back and fix once you realize, hang on, I'm changing track.
Not unless it is, I'll go and pop notes in sometimes at different chapters. This is going to change point of view, or this scene isn't going to work, or whatnot. And sometimes if I'm having a little faff around, I might start to make a few changes if I've just got a few minutes left. But in general, no, because I'll lose the thrust of the book. And that's probably my biggest thing for me, is that I have to write through to the end as fast as I can, so I don't lose the momentum of where I'm going.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And do you still do 350 word sort of sprints? Do you want to say something about that quickly, or how?
I do. I started doing this a few years back when I really lost my confidence, and it was after I'd had a book rejected, and I thought, how do I know that I'm not going to waste my time writing another book? And I was able to muster up the courage to write 350 words, and I could do it quite quickly. So I didn't judge whether they were any good. They just had to be 350 words. And I could even write, I'm a crap writer, over and over again. Get to 350, and then if you do that 6 or 7 times a day, you've got over your 2,000 words. And I still do it when I'm feeling scared, because so much of it is getting past the fear, isn't it?
Yes, my writing, it's actually quite similar. My process, I think, once we actually get started, it's a matter of getting into the book and just writing and keeping going, because I suffer a lot of doubt and anxiety as well. So I think, that's something, I feel like that's something a lot.
Show me an author that doesn't.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say.
There'll be a man.
Yes. I think often as well, like if it's the new authors as well, or people who are not published yet, that don't suffer doubt, because we haven't had all the time to, all the voices in our heads now. I find, like, when I first wrote a book, I thought, wow, this is amazing. And it totally wasn't. That's why it got rejected. Lots of times after. But I thought, I'm just so good at this. I'm great. And this is fun. And it's amazing. And then now I have voices in my head of all the editors I've had, of those 1-star reviews, which you love reading out. And you have to work really hard to switch that off. And I think
the confidence of being a debut author.
I know.
We thought we were.
Yeah, and you think that, I've written one book, so that's it. Like, now it's all going to be smooth sailing. But as you said, it's not necessarily smooth sailing. It may look like it's smooth sailing. We've both had highs and lows along the way. As I said, you've had that book rejection, which I can totally understand knocking your confidence. And I've had, sales in the US that have completely bombed, which makes you think, obviously I'm not good enough. So it's something you've got to work with, don't you? And you have to move past in the best way you can.
Yeah, and that's so important. I think that people don't, aspiring authors know, not in a bad way, that it is this up and down, all careers, I suppose, across the board are up and down, and you go through periods that you're not that great and you're not doing that well, and then it could just be one book that then makes you do much better. And
you never know what's around the corner. Do you? No. I think you just need to really, and you talked about a bit of a down period a couple of years ago, and I definitely had that as well, probably almost a similar time, in terms of that. The anxiety about thinking about writing made me feel physically sick, because I just didn't think that I had it in me. And it's so much a part of your head, because look, you've written 8 brilliant selling amazing books that no one's going to love everything, are they? We know that. We don't expect everyone to love our stuff, but more people than not do. And I've written plenty of books too, and so logically you go, I must be able to do this. But that's what anxiety and doubt, it just eats you up, doesn't it? I think I can't do anything else. That's the thing as well. I have no other qualifications anymore. No.
We often talk for those at home about the Bunnings plan, and that is, if writing fails, then we're going to go get a job at Bunnings. But you know what you
I don't
said
know
is
anything about home care or gardening or anything, so they probably
no. We might have to work on the cashier or the sausages.
Yes.
That would be ideal. I think that the key, actually, you said do what I did, and I think that, you know, what you did as well and what everyone needs to do, the only answer is keep going.
And that's what I was actually going to say, keep going too. But there are I realized that the pressure of writing consistent books that pay the bills was taking the joy away from me. And the pressure of thinking, I'm doing reasonably well here and people like my books here, but I should be doing better globally. I should have a film. That took away the joy. And so it's really important now for me to step back and remind myself that I do this because I love story and I don't want to do anything else. And that's what matters. Yes, both of us are professional writers, so we do need to earn money. But I feel like when you're feeling down and out, like to me, it was to really take a step back and go, why do you do this? Yeah, go get a job at Bunnings if you don't want to do it. But to find the joy I know actually with this book, I don't know whether people will like it or whatever. And it does matter to me, but it almost doesn't, because I had fun writing it and I found the joy again. And so that's important to me, if that makes sense. Yeah.
It makes complete sense. And it is something that we have to do. And it's a bigger conversation that I had briefly with Jane Harper the other night after we saw her speak, because she was talking about it. And I've had it with other authors like you and I who work full time. And this isn't a side hustle for us. It is our career. And in most of our cases, we're also managing the big financial share of the family. And the idea of, is it possible to be able to do that on that really pragmatic, financially viable level, and also maintain that kind of the art and the creativity and the love? And I think the answer is yes. I do think it is. I don't think it's easy. No. But I also think that it will always look a little bit different, that what we do, you, me, Jane Harper, people that do it as a full-time money-making job, then it will look for the person who does it on the side as a love project that is not their livelihood. I think it is a little bit different.
I completely agree. Yeah. And it can sound like we're whinging, and it's not. It's just that I think you have to approach it a different way, and you have to work. If you're doing this as a side hustle and main job is like something you don't necessarily love, maybe you do like it. A lot of people do two things they love. But if your writing is your side hustle and it doesn't have the pressure of earning income, it was when I had little kids and I wasn't a published author, but I would sneak away to write if they napped, or like I had my mum or husband at home and they were entertaining them. And it was like my secret joy, not secret joy, but my special joy. And it was like such a delight to go there. It changes when you have to do it. But it doesn't mean that you don't want to do it, you don't love it. Anyway, we could talk about that. We've gone off on a tangent.
That's a topic.
But I'll just quickly say, so I write very similarly, I guess. I write in sprints, not 350 words, but I find that if I've got a little timer, which I've shown on Writes4Women before, actually, that Lucy Score, who is a US author, posted about this. It's from Amazon and it's fabulous. So it just basically, if anyone's watching on YouTube, you can see it. But if not, it's a little whiteboard that I can write down a goal for the day, and then I've got sprint 1, sprint 2, sprint 3, sprint 4,
that's
5, and a timer, so I can leave my phone in the bedroom, because otherwise I get distracted easily. And so I can time it. It's so good. It's on Amazon. They're reasonably cheap, and it just means that I can do things in half an hour. So I don't do 350, but I do half an hour. And I find if I know what I'm doing, and some days you know more what you're doing, then I can easily write 2,000 words in 4 sprints. Some days it takes more time, but it really helps me focus because there's so many distractions out there. And then one thing I do, which I know you don't do, and I think it's a crazy thing to do, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend what I do, that's my timer because I fiddled with it, is that I do, so we talked about the difference between Sally's and my writing in terms of drafting. Sally does multiple drafts and moves ahead, whereas I do end up writing probably only 1 or 2 drafts. I want to clarify, this is before I submit to a publisher, and same with you, right, Sally? You will do multiple drafts before you actually submit it to your editor.
And then multiple more afterwards.
And same. And then I do multiple drafts with my publisher and editor. So, it's not like I do no drafts but I do I circle back with my writing. So it used to be, I think I would just, the day I sat down to write, I would read like whatever I wrote yesterday. And then you pick up little things like spelling mistakes and grammar and extra words and all that kind of stuff. But then I got in this weird habit of reading almost all the book every time when I sat down to write, which is all right when you've only written a couple of chapters because it doesn't take that long. But if you've written 100,000 words, then it takes 4 hours. And then I feel like I've done a whole day's work when I haven't actually written a word and I'm exhausted and I need a nap. But so I've tried to.
The first time we heard you say that, Lisa and I nearly lost our minds that you would read your book every single day before you started writing.
It's crazy. And I'm not a fast reader, so I should say I skim read like bits and pieces. I'll read a paragraph here and then I'll scroll a bit and read a paragraph, not the actual whole book, but it can go through. But what I've realized is it does mean that I pick up things or that I forgotten about. Like I've forgotten that I put something in this scene and I meant to do something later on. And so then I go, oh, hang on. And it sort of jolts my memory for things that I might write about in that scene. So it works for me. And it means that by the time I get to the end, I'm really over it, 100% over the book. And I just want to send it off. But also I don't actually need to do that bigger. I do a read through probably to check for inconsistencies or mistakes and stuff, but that's probably then I would do that and then send it straight off. So I guess I'm redrafting as I go, so we're both drafting and doing multiple drafts. It's just the way it's done. Yeah,
I was about to say that what you just described is what I do in the drafting process. So in fact, we talk about being so different, but in fact, and I read my book multiple times over all of those drafts. So you know, it's the same process, but it's just
a different way of doing it. Yeah, exactly. So speaking of editing, with this book, not your own edits, or if you want your own edits, but was there any major big changes that had to happen in the editing process? Any arguments you had with your editor or editors? Because explain to us a little bit who does the editing for your book once you send it on. You've got multiple editors that you work with, haven't you?
I do. Two that get it. My main publisher is in America, Jen, and it used to go first to her and she would have comments, and then it ended up being distributed to the other editors in the UK and Australia. But then they tended to have thoughts as well.
Yeah.
At that point, which is really annoying. So we now send it to all three at first, and then they can weigh in, and if they disagree, they can thrash it out there, or I can just
weigh in with you, or do you they talk to each other first before they come to you?
There has been times when there was a disagreement that I found out later that a phone conversation had gone on before it got to me. And that was where Jen had already sent her notes, and then the publisher in Australia was about to send their notes but didn't want to drop a bomb saying disagree. So that time there was. I don't think that's I found out about that, but in general I think that the way it worked is that they would all reply with their comments. I would pick and choose the ones that I liked. And unless they disagreed, in general, I would work on whatever they suggested.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think a lot of people a lot of aspiring authors or new authors think that you just do everything your editor says, or that the editor just changes it completely and you don't and it's just not like that at all, is it? It's a collaborative experience. But as you said, it must be even more interesting when you've got maybe an American and Australian editor who actually think differently. Are then you the deciding vote, or is Jen? Because
I think yes. Usually the one that says that I don't have to change anything. I agree with this.
I would be the same because I'm lazy and rewriting is hard. Yeah,
they got me.
Starting editing with this book.
This was probably the least. I had the least amount of edits of any book that I
isn't that wonderful?
It was glorious, and there were still several, of course, as there is with any book, and they were mostly go a bit deeper here. I didn't understand that. I feel like you could have portrayed this better, as opposed to I didn't like that, change that. And there was a little bit of going back. I am lucky enough to have a police detective friend who's a soon-to-be author, Karen Main. She gives me that police. She reads my books before.
I didn't realise that. I've heard you had a police friend, and I knew about the author, but I didn't know that was the same person.
So that was how. She reads my books for the police detail and reminds me that not everything's an episode of Line of Duty. And that things aren't plausible. So that happened too. But no, this was glorious, and fingers crossed that will happen again. But judging by the state of the work in progress that I'm working on now, I think it's unlikely.
But do you ever feel you're not the best judge of your own work? Like, I feel like sometimes the books that I think nailed it, which is very rare, as we know, but I send it in and I think they're going to go, wow, this is really great, Rachel's your best. And then instead they say, this is going to require a little bit of work, which usually means actually a lot of work. And then the ones that I think, oh my gosh, I'm embarrassed to send this, they're probably going to wonder why they're publishing me. They're like, that was really good. Here's a few changes we need to make, but not, as I said, always is quite a few edits, but they're lighter. Yeah. So I feel like we're never the best judge of our own work. Do you find that?
Yeah, I do. Although with this book, I will say this book was a bit different to a lot of others in that I did feel like it was a reasonably tight version. When I got it to them, I was happy with it, which is unusual for me.
That's such a good feeling too. I actually felt like that with this book too, almost, which is bizarre. Maybe we've both had those fairy books this time around.
I'm not having that experience with the next book. It's really, but this one I said recently it's my favorite book that I've written. Both how it turned out and also just it didn't take me to some of those dark places that some of with my own emotions.
Do you think, because it's been a few years since you wrote the wonderful book that everyone wants to know about, the Swingers book, do you think you're starting to slowly recover from the anxiety that you got from that experience?
Yeah, the Swingers book was the book that was rejected and destroyed my confidence. Part of me wants to say yes, and then that makes me anxious because I think maybe I'm due another.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Yep.
And, what we know, someone said to me in an interview, what have you learned from that experience?
Yep.
And what kind of advice would you have to an author to stop that from happening? And I said, honestly, I've learned nothing and I don't know how I could stop it from happening again.
If you did, you'd feel more comfortable.
Yeah, in fact, I will say that if I keep writing books for the rest of my life, which is the plan, this will happen again.
Yeah. And you don't want a book out there. I mean, you trust your publishers and stuff. Like I've always said that, please, if it really is terrible, please tell me. Although I'm sure yours wasn't terrible, I'm sure. But so I know you exactly what you mean. Yeah, it's really interesting. This one actually, because I went quite dark in the first version. There's elements of darkness, but I had actually, I can't say this, and I can't say the old name, but Munchausen by proxy, is that right? And it's now factitious disorder by proxy or whatever. I actually had that the main character, Deb, had that happen to her as a child, like her mum was, and her mum went to jail for it. And I did a lot of research. It's very hard for anyone to go to jail for it, and blah, blah. But I had it. And that was one of the things they were like, because there's other elements in there which I don't want to give away because that's quite dark, but domestic abuse and some things that happen. And they were like, this poor woman, she's just had too much go on to her. And maybe she doesn't need that huge dark childhood. Maybe she just needs the experience she's had with an ex, but also maybe her mum just left with her with her dad and she felt. So I've got a quote on my wall actually that I heard Emily Henry say on a podcast. And I think this really made me go, yeah, she's so right. And that my editor, when they said that, I was like, yeah, although I did all that research and I like that angle, you're right. And it's not how big the stakes are, it's how personal they are. And I think I'm like, I'm just going to throw all this dark, horrible stuff that has happened to me. And we don't necessarily have to do that all the time. So that was a real big lesson for me in that one.
I read something, I think it was on Burke Harrell's Instagram, that was in a similar vein, but more crimey. And I'm going to get it wrong, but it said something like, it's not more bodies, it's more impact or something. Like it was that the one body counts and it's kind of,
exactly. I think sometimes we just try and, because we're worried about, we want to keep people's attention, we want people to be interested, and so we just keep throwing stuff at it. Whereas sometimes we said, keep it simple, choose a few things really to focus on and make them impactful and deep. There was probably a couple of other things. This book, you'll laugh at this, Sally. So one of the things, readers, listeners, Sally and I we haven't really talked about this, but one of us is more of an overwriter and one of us is more of an underwriter. and we've joked about before being slightly jealous of. So my books are typically at least 130,000 words, and I've realized I get sick of writing at 100,000, and that's when I'm just so over it. I get cranky and grumpy. So if only I could write a 100,000 word book, I think I'd just be such a happier person and a better person to live with. And Sally, what's your average kind of book length?
80, but it actually, I tend to come up short, and I've even had some around 60,000, and then I've had to, because obviously that's true, and I build it up. But we often joke that I need to you can give me some of your words.
If we could just put some of my waffle into Sally's and pad it out, then it'd be perfect. But the funny thing is,
like a boob job that and actually we could do this too, where they take some of your boobs and put them into mine.
You can have words and boobs. There we go. I'm just a waffler, which is probably why the podcasts get too long. This book, The Workwives, I think it was 173,000 words in my first draft. I know.
What is it now?
It's only 128 or something, I think. Like it got really cut down, and it needed to. I waffled a lot, but I just thought, why do I have to write that? Why do I have to do that to get? It just really annoys me. But a lot of that was office scenes and more things going on in the office, and that because I chose to title The Workwives, I thought it was a book I should be focusing on that sort of stuff. And in the end, we actually had a bit of a discussion about whether the book should be called The Workwives, because really it's not about the office. It's more about their friendship, and it's about mother-daughter relationship. And you know how books just can change a lot from how. So it wasn't necessarily the book that I pitched to them. And I have had a review already. I see that they think they were getting something else. But we did discuss a lot about the title and go, look, although it is about workwives, even though, so I think it's still okay, and we couldn't come up with a better title. But that was one of the things, a lot of cutting.
Yeah, and perhaps on too much of a pragmatic level, the book, the title just needs to make someone pick it up, doesn't it?
True, yeah. It's a con. So I was going to say, was this your working title?
Very fancy packaging. No, it was not. And it was the subject of great debate because I called it The Cliff when I wrote it.
Yes, I vaguely remember you mentioning that like a while ago. Yeah.
Which I wasn't necessarily wedded to, but the whole book is set on this cliff, and the cliffs are significant to the plot, but also like on a deeper level, and marriage. It's about kind of going over the cliff. And I, as I said, I guess because I wasn't necessarily wedded to it, the American publishers liked it and were happy to go ahead. The Australian publishers didn't like it. And it was one of those kind of, there was back and forth, and I was just a voyeur, just waiting to see if they would agree.
Yeah.
And there was a bit of hullabaloo, and there was some other titles bandied around, which I did not like. And at one point, it looked as though we were going to have two titles.
Which would be so horrible. That would just be terrible, wouldn't it?
I like to think that I have a good reputation as being a nice, easygoing author, but I cracked it.
Fair enough. I think so, because that just really annoy readers. They'll buy both, especially in our global world. They'll end up buying both and then be annoyed.
Which actually might not be bad, but
good for you. But they're not, because you'll also get all the emails and the Facebook messages and the Instagram saying, "You conned me. I bought two of your books." Even though it's not.
But I was picturing all of the emails, and I said, you guys have having this idea. I'm going to be the one that gets the emails. It's complicated enough because it releases at 2 different times in 2 different countries, one title. And The Soulmate was the one that everyone liked. And look, I like that there is that, while soulmate obviously means the marriage relationship and the love, but also the souls that come to the cliff and the soul of the woman who went over there. So it has a bit of a double interest.
I think The Soulmate is such a great title for the book. Like when I read it at the end, it really, without giving any spoilers away, it really resonates. So I think, I'm glad that you got that title in the end, and it goes well with all your other books.
Yeah, I just think it's good that it's got a dark, kind of sinister looking cover, because otherwise people might think they were getting a rom-com with The Soulmate, and they might be a little bit freaked out in the first chapter.
That is so true. We're probably almost up to the end of this discussion. I think I could talk to you about this for hours. People are probably sick of our voices by now. But you mentioned the acknowledgements earlier on, and how, I can't even remember what you said about the acknowledgement, about the husbands and the... how do you feel about writing acknowledgements? Like, I love reading them, but are you like, do you love writing acknowledgements, or do you find it a bit stressful because you're scared of getting the wrong people? And also, the more you write, I find it's hard to be original in them.
I know. I've changed my stance on it. I have noticed that a lot of authors stress about forgetting people in their acknowledgements, and I have never done that.
Yeah,
I've never stressed about it because I'm probably, I don't know, a little bit too self-involved or something. I have left people
smart
out.
to do. Yeah.
There's always another book that they can get thanked in. So I don't really worry about that. I do think it's not very original. I thanked the same people last year.
I've seen that as well. I like it. I'm like, and when I read someone's amazing acknowledgements, I'm like,
yeah, how did they do that? So I guess over the last couple of books, what I have done, which I have enjoyed more, is made it a little bit more of a storytelling about the inspiration in how I started. I introed into the thank yous by saying this is where the book idea came from.
Great idea.
These are all the people. And I think I did it with the last one. And in a way, that almost feels like the moment I write those, that little, vignette or whatever, it leads me into the publication. I'm approaching publication time.
Yep.
We're about to go and promote it. And I've just done a little bit of a summary of my feelings on it and thanked the people who were involved. So it's almost a rite of passage.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a ritual. I'm similar in that now, because there's so many people I talk to on a day-to-day or weekly basis or occasionally, like a lot of people that I love in the writing community, and I can't thank everyone because it'd be like, and they're not necessarily for that particular book. So now I'm a bit like you too. It's like people who have actually done something on that book, because it can get ridiculously long as well. Otherwise, you'd be thanking the high school teacher that you had who gave you the whatever, and your cousin's dog for giving you a hug when you were feeling anxious.
I'm thinking about thanking Judge Judy for entertaining me every afternoon as I've been working through my edits, because she deserves
that. Because then maybe we'll get a copy, and I don't know, she's a bit scary. Like,
I know she may not like it.
Well, we'll just a couple little short questions. Snacks while you're writing. Do you have any, or drinks? Yeah, look.
For those of you at home, Rachael and my dirty pleasure. Is that what it's called? That makes it sound.
Yeah, it does. Different podcast.
Diet Coke. And I really enjoy one of an afternoon. Are you going to say the same?
Yeah. And do you know what? I think there's a lot of authors I know drink Diet Coke, and the ones that do seem to be doing reasonably well. So I
think we stick with it. I have no plans to change.
Too.
I've noticed that too.
Yeah, it's bizarre, isn't it? I'm pretty sure Nora Roberts drinks Diet Coke.
Anyway. Yeah, she does.
Yeah. So quickly, two more things. What's the thing you love most about writing?
First draft.
I love
and that alone time in the cave, because as people talk about writing being solitary, but publishing is not. It's collaborative, and we spend a lot of, especially you and I, a book a year or 2 books a year, we spend a lot of time actually out there in the world. And so time in the cave and that first draft where plans are cancelled and it's just you, I love that bit. That's my favorite.
And there's all that potential still.
And you haven't ruined it yet.
Yeah, exactly. I think I should have thought of my own answer since I'm asking you the question. but I don't know. I think it's probably the same, because I like beginnings as well. I really that sort of I find it. I know a lot of authors say they write faster towards the end. I'm actually not like that. I write much more quicker in the beginning. More quicker. I can't speak properly. But so I love the writing process. No, I love having written. I love looking back on the stuff. Yeah, I think, and that's the part of it. And then, of course, the exciting part is seeing the cover, but that's mostly the writing process. Yeah. What's the thing you hate most about writing or the whole book world?
Oh, good question. Most people say bad reviews, but I love bad reviews.
Yeah, I mean, I think we discovered that a few years ago when we were with Lisa on tour, and we decided to share some, and then you've done that now as well on your Insta. It's when you have fun with them. If you're reading them alone by yourself in your office on a bad day when you're already feeling full of doubt, they're not great. But when you share them with a friend or readers who love your stuff, then suddenly it's just fun. They think that's quite funny. And we've had some great ones. I never get over. If anyone hasn't heard your best one, I'm sure you remember it. If not, can we share your best review?
There's been quite a few, but one of the best ones was someone said, I have gone through my life to this point wondering what it's all about. What is the purpose of life? What am I doing here? And after reading Sally Hepworth's book, I discovered my purpose in life is to warn other people not to read this book. Just like, and that's the best review ever. But
it is, I think.
I do want to say to aspiring authors or authors new in their career, they can hurt, of course they can, but I encourage you to get a sense of humor about it, not just for those ones, but for the whole career ahead, which, as we said, will have ups and downs. And at the end of the day, 1-star reviews aren't going to hurt you, your career or you physically. Everyone gets them.
Yep.
And if you can just have a laugh or not look at them, then do that and just know that it's just part of it.
I agree. And when you said not look at them, like I used to look at them all the time, but now I'm a bit more aware of my own emotions. And I know sometimes maybe now is not a good time to go. What's worse, the 3-star ones that rave about. Why didn't you give me 5 stars if you loved it that much?
Oh, they're really annoying. That's true. But the other one is the 3-star review that gives you a really fair assessment.
And you're like, I agree.
This book had a lot of potential to really be 5 stars, but they just let it go by waffling on or including many things or something, and you think, shit, they're right.
Yes,
I know. And that makes me more annoyed than someone who said that I gave purpose to their life.
I completely agree. That's so true. We should finish on a high note. Oh, I know we'll finish on. Instead of the 1-star reviews, I would say, though, as well, more thing on reviews, because it is something that everyone deals with in publishing, and it's something that people will have to deal with if they're going to get into publishing. Isn't it funny how you remember the 1-star or the 3-star that tells you, exactly what you did wrong? Yet usually the 5 stars and the 4 stars do outweigh. And I always think, why do those people that don't like my book, why do I let them matter than the other people who do?
Because, you know what I mean? Like Julia Roberts said in Pretty Woman, the bad stuff's easier to believe.
So true. Very true. All right. Well, one more thing before we end. We've got 4 minutes to go. So a quick spiel about what's next for you.
I am just finishing up, I hope, my next year's book. If you're in Australia, hopefully it'll come out kind of October next year. Currently it's called The Lucky Ladies. I don't know if that will.
Is it about lottery?
No, it is about family dysfunctionality once again, and this time it is foster sisters, 3 women who grew up together in foster care, and they harked back to, they're now adults, and they are sent back to the little town where they grew up to speak to the police when a body of a baby is found buried under the home where they grew up in foster care.
Oh my goodness. Can I read it now?
Over there. No, and you definitely don't want to read it now because it's in a few different pieces. But once again, you'll get the murder and the relationships and the dark humor and all of those
sounds
things.
Fantastic. As I said, can't wait for that.
What about you? What's coming up next?
Have just submitted what was called The Reinvention of Adeline Walsh, which is semi-linked to 2 of my real romances, but it probably will get a change of title to be a talk title.
I love that title.
I like it too, but it's linked to Talk of the Town and something to talk about. We probably need to keep it in the thing. And it's a nasty character that I wrote a villain years ago and never planned on writing why she was bad, which I really need to, if I'm going to write bad people, actually make a reason. So then I suddenly thought, how am I going to redeem her? I can't do it. I did it a few years ago in another book. Can't do the same thing. And one day I was thinking about the Thornbirds and how there's priests in Fleabag and the Thornbirds. I was like, do we have romance with nuns? So I made Adeline join a convent, which required a little bit of research. And the hero is an atheist who has very good reasons for hating religion. So that's what I've just finished. So a nun and an atheist romance.
I'm in. I love that. Oh my goodness.
It's lots of fun to write. So he's not no hot priests, just hot atheist.
I was just thinking from Fleet. There's maybe hot nun.
But she's very hot. Yeah.
Hot nun.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sally. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. And I hope that all of the Writes for Women listeners get something out of our little insight into our writing process. And
so great.
Good luck with the new book. I know it's going to sell like hotcakes. Yeah. We shall
see you on the road.
Definitely. Hopefully we cross paths at some stage.
I hope so.